Good afternoon. I'm Mark Holland. I'm on the board of directors of the Federal Bar Association. Let's, before we do anything else and have a proper welcome, let's first give thanks. Barbara Kiser.
Good afternoon. It is an honor to be here, and I'm going to take the privilege of always wanting to do this, order in the court. With the grace of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, and in that love and moved by the Holy Spirit, let us humble our hearts and our minds as we go to God in prayer. The Lord, right now, you know our needs and our desires. Wounds are now being opened that we thought was closed when we said our last goodbye to Honorable Jackson Kiser. But today we open them back up ourselves and our very being to receive much, much more joy. The joy of hearing persons give their best regards, remarks of days that the Honorable Judge Kiser made an impact in their lives. We know the service that he gave serving you as an officer in the armed services, leading others and guiding them, and being a judge, though we recognize you are a judge above all judges and a ruler over all, but you entrusted the care to Judge Kiser, and I feel as though he heard 1 Peter when you made the words, care for the flock given to you. And the words that you were hearing, the words that were already said over him in his obituary, he did just that. He called on the gift of grace at the convening of every trial session, every conversation, that there would be justice and mercy. Though some may not have felt that way after the hearing, but I feel as though he did it under your instructions. And so it is today we humble our hearts to invoke the presence of the Holy Spirit, knowing that you're already there, but we humbling ourselves, acknowledging you. Touch the hearts of those who are to speak. Give them sustaining grace to speak from their heart, not articulate how we would want it to be, but to give more justice to his wife and his family and those he touched in such a special way. Now, in your mercy, hear the other silent prayers that are lifted up right now. We submit them to you, for we acknowledge what we have asked for, your presence to lead us in this great memorial service, honoring one of your servants in such a special, special way. Amen.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the Federal Bar Association, the Danville Bar Association, and the Martinsville-Henry County Bar Association, is that any better? Okay. Yeah. Do we have technology people? On behalf of the Federal Bar Association, the Danville Bar Association, and the Martinsville-Henry County Bar Association, I welcome all of you here today. And we have too many distinguished guests to recognize everyone who's here, but I would like to mention our guests of honor, Judge Kiser's wife, Carol, his children, Bill, John, Beth, and Annette, Judge Urbanski, Judge Ballou, Judge Dillon, Judge Moon, Judge Hoppy, Judge Milam, Christopher Kavanaugh, the Clerk of Court Laura at Austin, our Chief United States Probation Officer Jennifer Williams, the longtime courtroom deputy Heather McDonald, the deputy clerk who's since retired Martha Hupp, and Pat Walker. I thank all of y'all for being here today. On October 20th, 2020, Judge Kiser died unexpectedly in the midst of the COVID pandemic. And because of the protections that were then in place, a proper memorial service was not able to be held. And so after those procedures began to be modified, those various bar associations agreed that it was appropriate to have a memorial service. And we thought that now, near the anniversary of his death, was an appropriate time to convene for this service. Judge Kiser lived a life of service, first to the Army JAG Corps, then to the Army Reserves, then to the Federal Prosecutor's Office, and then into private practice, where he gave that service to his firm, to the clients of his firm, and to his community. Judge Kiser excelled at every level. Trial lawyers still tell stories of when he practiced in the law firm that he practiced with. Jim Daniel, a local attorney here in Danville, said when we were coming up, he was the best around. He was getting $1 million verdicts long before anyone else was. And it was that unmatched excellence that got him noticed for the federal judgeship. In 1981, Senator John Warner was scouring Virginia looking for someone to fill the federal judgeship and recommended to President Reagan. Senator Warner interviewed Republicans, Democrats, and independents. He was quoted as saying, "Each night I went back and looked at my notes and they all pointed to Jackson Kiser." President Reagan agreed, and for the next 39 years, Judge Kiser served with honor and distinction in this very courtroom. Today, we remember and honor that excellence and his lifelong service. Our first speaker will be Phil Anderson. Phil is a Pennsylvania County native. He went to Hampden-Sydney College, where he graduated with honors, went to the University of Virginia Law School. Following law school, he clerked in the Western District for Judge James Turk. He is a past president of the Virginia State Bar. He is a member of the Virginia Law Foundation. He's a former president of the Ted Dalton Inn of Court in Roanoke. Phil has tried cases in Central and Western Virginia in federal and state court. He has an exceptional reputation throughout the state. He's a permanent member of the Judicial Conference of the United States Court of Appeals and serves as president of Frith Anderson Peak in Roanoke. It's my honor to introduce Phil Anderson.
Well, good afternoon. It's a true honor to be here. I'm sort of pinch hitting a little bit. When Stephanie Grana is our current president of the Virginia State Bar, called me some months back and she said, "Phil, I've been invited to speak at Judge Kiser's memorial service." And Mark, one correction, I did work some with Judge Turk and practiced in front of him, but I actually clerked with Judge Kiser. So I was one of his third, I think I was in the third set of clerks here. But at any rate, Stephanie asked me if I could pinch hit for her because she had a conflict. And so I was certainly obviously honored to be able to stand in her stead here before you today, representing the Virginia State Bar, but also honored to be here just as a former clerk. And Ms. Kiser, it's always good to be with you and Bill and Annette, Beth and John. It's such an honor to be here on this special occasion. You know, all of us can likely count on one hand the people that have made a significant impact on our lives. And for me, there's no question, and probably true for the 60+ men and women who clerked for Judge Kiser through the years, that Judge Kiser was that for me. You know, like all federal judges, judges have tremendous applicants for clerkships, exceptionally qualified people. As Mark said, I grew up 20 miles north of here on a tobacco farm, and I was honored to be one of Judge Kiser's first clerks. Now, I'm sure there are some of you in the midst who know me, who are wondering, how in the world did you slip past clerkship gatekeeper? And I'll say that remains one of the great mysteries of the Western District, and we'll just leave that where it is. But for some reason, Judge Kiser chose to give this Southside native tobacco farmer an opportunity to serve as one of his clerks. And for that, I have been eternally grateful. And that year, clerking for him here in this building remains unquestionably one of the most pivotal and critical years of my professional development. As I said, I grew up on a farm, and as my dad would say, you know, if you didn't work on the farm, you worked public work. And so I only had 2 public work jobs before I started practicing law. Both of them were in this building. When I finished college at Hampton City, I worked upstairs with W.C. Dan Daniel, and then went to law school. And then Judge Kiser gave me the opportunity to come back here and clerk with him. What a great experience that was for me. You know, we could spend hours talking about Judge Kiser's cases and his decisions, some of which made it to the Supreme Court of the United States. I will trust that and rest that with those that are much more qualified to do that. That might actually even be a time for a course, perhaps at his alma mater at Washington Lee. So I thought, as I was thinking about today, I thought, well, I just want to share a few personal observations about Judge Kiser and what he meant to me, what I know he meant to others around him. And the first thing that kind of comes to mind about Judge Kiser is, as Mark said, he was a servant, and he was a public servant. In 2013, the thing that kind of, I think, brings this home as well as anything, Judge Kiser had the opportunity, and this may be the only time that this occurred, I'm not sure, maybe someone could probably correct me, but in 2013, he had the opportunity to swear in one of his former clerks as a judge in the 23rd Judicial Circuit, David Carson. I thought Dave might be here with us today. I think he had a conflict. But David told this story at recently in Roanoke at the Roanoke Bar Association when he was presenting a memorial resolution for Judge Kiser. And he said, right before they were getting ready to go into the courtroom and have the oath administered, Judge Kiser got right in his face, and he looked him square in the eye, and he took his finger and he put him in his chest, and he said, David, when you put on that robe and when you walk up that bench, never, ever, ever forget. Those people in that courtroom, those litigants, they're not there for you. That's their day. You're there for them. Earlier this week, we had our end of court meeting at Roanoke College. Judge Ballou is the president of our end of court, and he had tasked some of our law students that are members of the Inn with going out and meeting with some of our members and interviewing them, and gave them the opportunity to not only be mentored by some of our members, but also to make a presentation. And so one of the young law students came forward, and he'd had a chance to speak with Judge Carson. And he said Judge Carson spent several hours with him, just going over his career and what he thought about the practice of law and things that he had learned. And he said, right at the very end, he said, Judge Carson said to me, he said, one of the things I'll always try to remember is before I go into that courtroom, that those folks are not in there for me, that I'm in there for them. And I just had to sit there and think about what I'd heard from David earlier and then hear this. And I said, what a great legacy, a legacy from Judge Kiser. From Judge Kiser to Judge Carson, from Judge Carson to this young law student, from this young law student to the other students in the room and to the experienced lawyers there and some of the younger lawyers there who perhaps one day may put on that black robe. And what a legacy of public service. So that was really special for me. And Judge Kiser understood that he could have used his intellect, and he was certainly, anybody that knew him and had any experience with him knew that he was one of the most intelligent, had the keenest intellect. He was really brilliant of any person you would ever be around. And such a commanding knowledge of the law. There was never a case that we would have that we would go in and start talking about that he didn't pull something from back his practice. And I said, gosh, how did he handle plaintiff's cases? He handled criminal cases, he handled defense cases, he handled banking issues, he had bond issues. It just seemed like he had such a broad perspective of practice, and he always had such a commanding knowledge of the law. And he could have chosen to use all of those gifts and all of those talents and all of those experiences in so many ways. but he chose the path of a public servant. And for that, he understood that he was an indispensable component of a justice system tasked with upholding the rule of law and was an integral part of our self-governance. You know, the rule of law is a phrase that we hear perhaps with a little bit more frequency now than in years past, but while perhaps it was not always a part of our daily lexicon, it was absolutely a part of how Judge Kiser conducted himself every day as a judge. No matter your ideology, no matter your political persuasion, no matter your personal relationships, no matter the emotional pull of a case, if you could read the cases, and if you could read the statutes, and if you could look at the precedent, you had a pretty good idea where Judge Kiser was going to land with things. He understood that our system of justice depended upon him and those like him in that position, applying the law consistently, regardless of any personal feelings he might have about the outcome, because he understood that in ensuring a fair system that treated everyone with respect and everyone with dignity and everyone equally, and did it consistently applying the law, was far more important than any individual outcome. I remember sitting back in these chambers one time at a case where a lawyer that he had known for a long, long time, had a long history with, and they were good friends, had an employment-related case, and it was a very compelling case, factually, and from the equities. But as I had prepared him for that hearing, it was pretty clear it was procedurally barred. So we go back in chambers, and this lawyer who he knew, who he had a wonderful relationship with, was arguing, pulling out all the stops. I mean, he was leaning on everything he had. He didn't have much of a hand in terms of the law, but he was leaning hard on the equities and making his very best argument. And the judge sat there and listened, and he was patient, and he let him get his piece, and he say everything he wanted to say. And he said, Joe, whatever his name was, I get it. I understand. What happened to your client was Sunday school wrong. But the law says he doesn't have a case. And that's what I've got to do. I've got to dismiss the case. That wasn't a good day for the judge. He didn't like that. He didn't like that, but he understood that that's what he had to do. And you're going to hear later this afternoon from Jim Haskins, one of his law partners. And I tell you, Judge Kiser was one of these people who could have done anything, but he did the thing that he loved. He loved being a lawyer. He loved practicing law, and you could see it. There were times when I think he missed it. I think he missed the collegiality of the practice. He missed handling the cases. He missed the fight. But, you know, you see so many lawyers today who it's just a job. They just show up. It's 9 to 5. They just want to get in and do the bare minimum and get out. But he loved it. And you could tell in the way that he told the stories how much he loved it. And some of my favorite times with him were in a car. Well, I would always meet him in Martinsville, in the parking lot of the Dutch Inn. Oh, it's not the Dutch Inn now. I forget what it's called. But I would drive up from Danville and I would meet him at the parking lot of the Dutch Inn. We'd get in the car. We'd go either to Charlottesville or Roanoke or Big Stone or Abington or wherever we were going. And that's when we had the very best conversations. And he would tell stories about practicing law. And I remember one of the stories he told was that I think Mark alluded to this, the $1 million verdict. So the very first $1 million verdict in the state of Virginia was a case that Judge Kiser and his partners handled in circuit court, I guess in the city of Martinsville, I think. Some of my former partners were involved in that case, defending that case. Judge Kiser, he said, yeah, I remember one of the first times I remember seeing Rabbit Moore. He was running across the golf course at Chat Moss Country Club to get me to endorse an order in this case. And that was the case that he later got the $1 million verdict in. And I just as an aside, I've got to tell you this story. Legend has it that after that case came down and the $1 million was awarded, and I'm sure Judge Kiser and Jim Young, I'm sure they were high-fiving, might even fire up a stogie or something later that night. But Rabbit had to make a call. And so he made a call to the office. And Bill Toon, who some of you old folks in here may remember, Bill Toon took the call. And this is back, obviously before cell phones, so he had to find a payphone somewhere. So he calls up. And Toon says, what's going on with the case? He said, well, the jury just came back. He said, well, tell me about it. He said, well, Toon, I've got some good news and I got some bad news. He said, well, let me have the bad news. He said, well, the bad news is the jury came back for $1 million. He said, $1 million? That's the first $1 million verdict in the state of Virginia. He said, that's bad news. He said, how could that possibly be any good news associated with that? He said, Tune, in 10 years, nobody will know whether I won or lost. They'll just know I was in $1 million case. So Judge Kiser kind of helped make a career there. Another case, another story that I always amuses me when he told me about this, that he and Jim Young were representing the plaintiff in a case. And the guy was something of a little bit of a reluctant plaintiff. He didn't really want to pursue the case. He didn't like filing suit. He was kind of, so they brought him in and they worked him over and they kind of told him everything was going to be okay. And they went over the pleading with him and did all this stuff. And so the judge said, he finally kind of said, okay, I think I'm going to be okay with this. And they said, so he takes his papers and he heads on out of the office. And he said, he looks over at Jim and he says, I think that went okay. He said, yeah, I think I did. I think he's all right. I think we'll be okay. He said, I hadn't gotten back to my office and the receptionist buzzed me and says, Mr. Jones is back in the front office. He wants to see you with Mr. Young. And he said, what did we do? He hadn't been gone long enough for anybody to be in his ear and start talking to him about the case. And so he's just trying to figure out what in the world's going on. So he said, the clock fell on back in. He said, well, Mr. Jones, what's the issue? He said, well, we got some problems here with this paper you gave me. He said, well, what's the problem? He said, it's over here at this back. Right here, it says, your plaintiff prays for such other relief as the law allows. We ain't done no praying. Judge says, I thought about it for a few minutes, and he said, there comes times in your life when you realize that accommodation might be a bit more efficient than explanation. He said, so we took a knee right there at Jim Young's desk, and he said, we gave that pleading a good old prayer meeting blessing, and everything was good. And the other thing that always has stuck with me with Judge Kiser is balance in life. He understood the importance of maintaining a balance in your professional and your personal life. And he always made his family a priority. And you guys, he talked about y'all all the time. He was so very proud of you, as he should have been. And Scott and I were talking about this earlier. Our offices were back over in this corner and he was back in these chambers. And when he would leave on Friday afternoons, he would come around. We'd still be there, kind of trying to look like we were busy. And he'd come through and he'd say, well, I think we've about used this week up. And he'd head on home. And I've heard him comment so many times that the happiest time of his day was when he pulled into the driveway of his home, got to see Carol and his family and enjoy the weekend with them. And of course, if he didn't have a trial or a hearing, we could expect him, at lunchtime, he would head up to the Y, get his swim in and come on back. And he's to try to stay in such great shape because he enjoyed some of those other activities like chasing that little white ball around chat moss. And so I think he enjoyed those opportunities too. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention something about how he treated lawyers and litigants and court staff and everybody. There's no question but that the judge had very, very high standards for the people that appeared in his court. If you came into his courtroom, you should be prepared. You should know your authorities. You should know your arguments. You should be very prepared, because you know what? He was going to be more prepared than you were. It didn't matter how much you did. He had already done more than that. But you could always expect that he was going to give you some pretty probing questions. He could have a pretty hot bench in a respectful way, but he was going to push you on matters and he was going to challenge your positions. But he always did it with the utmost respect for the lawyers. No one, I think I can say this safely, I don't know of many people that ever took their constitutional duties any more seriously than he did. But I can tell you, he never took himself very seriously. And in the era where civil discourse and civility and respect are in such short supply, we all would do well to reflect on how Judge Kiser treated those who appeared before him, the litigants as well as the counsel. He treated them all with respect, whether a defendant in a criminal case or a litigant in a civil case. He listened patiently, and regardless of whether you won or lost, when you left his courtroom, you knew that the system of justice had worked like it should have. He understood that this was his responsibility and one that he worked diligently to discharge every day. So being here on behalf of Stephanie Grant as the president of the State Bar, I think I can take a little privilege here and say, I'm going to speak on behalf of the 30,000 plus lawyers of the Virginia State Bar and the 60 plus men and women who clerked for him during his time on the bench, and the countless citizens who appeared before him in both civil and criminal cases over his long and distinguished career. And on behalf of those folks, say to Carol and Bill and Annette, Beth and John, thank you. Thank you for sharing your husband and your father with all of us. The contributions he made to the administration of justice, the preservation of the rule of law, and the promotion of civility and respect in our practice defy words. We all try, but we can't really do it justice. But for those of us fortunate enough to have witnessed even just a small part, we are forever, ever grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Our next speaker, keep everybody in order, is James W. Haskins. Jim is a fellow Martinsville High School graduate and a native of Martinsville. Jim went to University of Virginia undergrad and then went to the University of Virginia Law School. He returned to Martinsville and worked with Judge Kiser for 15 years. And in addition to that, worked with Judge Kiser during summers of law school as a clerk. Jim is was a named partner, and I believe this is one of the highest accolades as trial lawyer. I believe this is one of the highest accolades or compliments that I'm gonna mention today. And that is Jim was a named partner in the law firm of Young, Kiser, Haskins, and Mann. Just a phenomenal firm without peer. It's my honor to introduce my friend, Jim Haskins.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's a true honor for me to be here. Unfortunately, listening to my friend Phil Anderson and Scott Jones, who was Jack's permanent clerk, we never got to practice. No lawyers in our firm when Jack became a federal judge in 1981. So I really don't have any stories about the trials or the courtroom to share because we were never in a trial with Jack. But there's no question from what you heard from Phil, and I'm sure what you're going to hear the remainder of the day, he was an outstanding federal judge and had the respect of everybody that he ever dealt with. Scott Jones, who is going to follow me, Scott and I were pallbearers at Jack's funeral, and Scott delivered the eulogy, and it was truly one of the finest talks, and really got just truly into the type of man Jack Kiser was. So, but just briefly, let me tell you, obviously I've been doing this law work a long time, and we do a lot of trial work, and the law is with various firms, including Mr. Anderson's firm, but you now have plaintiffs' lawyers, you have defendants' firms, you have lawyers and sometimes really whole firms that represent doctors, healthcare providers, and so it goes. Some that do nothing but represent corporate defendants. But Jack Kiser took me in as a clerk many years ago, and I graduated from the University of Virginia Law School in 1966. And as Scott will tell you, or at least as he told the people at Jack's funeral, he was always a great teacher he wanted you to learn and understand the importance of what you were doing. And he would, Scott would say, he would give assignments to the clerks. He would give assignments to me back in the 1960s, 70s, right on up till 1981 when he became a federal judge. And I would write little memorandum and briefs, and we would talk, but he always wanted me to feel like that I was really helping him, providing him with some information. And of course, he knew the answer all along. It was a matter of what he was really doing for me. Now, back in those days, and I was talking to Judge Urbanski right before we convened our ceremony here today in honor of Jack, that as Judge Urbanski told me, quote, he was a phenomenal lawyer. People would come into our office and he would represent corporations, the American Furniture Company, for instance. And he was the corporate counsel. Our local sheriff one time got into a little trouble. Sometimes sheriffs and people like that, they're all politics, but in any event, it was a criminal case, and Jack represented the sheriff. It was Sheriff C.P. Witt at the time. The courtroom was packed. And this was in the old Henry County courthouse. And the defense that he put on for Sheriff Witt is still really talked about among members of the bar. And the sheriff was acquitted. He represented doctors. He represented people that were injured by the medical profession. Back then, we tried as my friend Judge Blue used to come back in his lawyer days, and we would try a lot of automobile cases. Judge Blue was a great defense lawyer and truly taught me a tremendous amount about trial work and both sides of the fence. Jack represented injured people. On the other hand, Jack was the local counsel in Martinsville, Henry County for Liberty Mutual Insurance Company. And everything he did was just so outstanding. And Judge Dillon, Judge Urbanski, Judge Moon, Judge Blue, they would refer to Jack today as the lead counsel. He just wasn't touching base or providing a little insight for the different types of law and the people he represented. He was the man, as trial lawyers sometimes like to say, he was in the pits, in the foxhole with whoever he represented. And his work, everybody felt that with Jack Kiser on your side in a trial court now, no question about what we've heard, and we're going to hear more today about what a great and phenomenal judge he was. But everybody felt that you truly had somebody on your side that believed in your cause and what you were doing. In addition to all of that, he could write a brief. He, again, would let me help him a little bit, at least I thought I was helping him, but of course the true story was he was really helping me, trying to teach me something of his abilities and his skills. We would go to, of course, our local trial courts. Some of the judges, you remember Judge Blue, Judge Hooker, people like that we tried our cases with. We would go to the Supreme Court of Virginia. I would tag along with carrying Jack's briefcase, but watching exactly what he was doing. We would go to the Fourth Circuit, kind of across the street there from the Virginia Supreme Court. And his abilities were just mind-boggling. And as Judge Urbanski told me before we convened, just absolutely phenomenal. So one of the things that he taught me, especially about appellate work, that, or even a motion, that you would be arguing to Judge Moon, Judge Blue, Judge Urbanski, Judge Dillon. You have really got to know, Jim, and learn once you make your basic points, that one of the most important things, and especially from a judge's point of view, is to sit down. That's it. I mean, don't keep going on and on. Now, Carol, his lovely wife who's here today, and his family, his children, Dr. Kiser, that Carol told me one time right after the Roanoke Bar, and I worked with Judge Carson on getting in touch with Carol and the family, that Carol works out in one of our little local gyms, and I see her there. And she was saying that one of the most meaningful things about what we're doing today and what they did in Roanoke is that the family, the children, of course, they knew their father, great family man, but they really began to appreciate what a significant, genuine, wonderful person he was to other people and the respect that he had from everybody. So I'm going to follow what he told me about the speeches and the talking. I'm going to sit down and but Jack Kiser, as Phil was saying, anybody that knew him really in a proper sort of way loved him because he was one of a kind. As Judge Urbanski said before we convened, he was absolutely phenomenal person, a judge, and an attorney, as I worked with him for so many years. Thank you very much for letting me share a few moments with you. But I thought it would be interesting for you really just to kind of hear what truly type of attorney he was before he became the great respected federal judge that he was. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Our next speaker is Judge Thomas Cullen's permanent clerk, Scott Jones. Scott is a Danville native, graduated from GW, and then went to University of Virginia undergrad. Scott then went to Richmond Law School, where he graduated magna cum laude, and became Judge Kiser's term clerk from 2009 to 2010. Scott went off to Richmond for a little while and returned to be Judge Kiser's permanent clerk or career clerk from 2011 to 2020. It's my pleasure to introduce Scott Jones.
Thank you, Mark. Let me start by thanking the three bar associations who co-sponsored this event. Just say out front, Judge Kiser would have hated it, but I'm glad we're doing it nonetheless. I'm honored to be able to speak and humbled that so many of you made the time to join us. Special welcome and thanks to all of our guests of honor, Mrs. Kiser, Bill and Annette, Beth and John. I know that no one misses the judge more than you do. Chief Judge Urbanski, Judges Dillon, Boone, Baloo, Hoppy, and Milam, thank you all for being here. And thanks to Mr. Kavanaugh, Ms. Austin, and Ms. Williams for coming and representing the district that Judge Kiser served for nearly 40 years. I want to say a warm thanks and welcome to some of our Danville court family, Heather, Martha, and Pat. Heather and Martha were the deputy clerks here in Danville with Judge Kiser for many years, and Pat was Judge Kiser's judicial assistant from the very beginning, serving alongside him for nearly 30 years. When Pat retired, Judge Kiser didn't replace her because, as he told me, Pat was irreplaceable. And I'm sorry to say that Sam Golightly couldn't join us. For those of you who knew him, Sam was here in the clerk's office for many years and was an invaluable part of our court family before he retired. Judge Kiser told me once that when he had to travel out of town for overnight for court, Sam's job was to bring the bourbon. When Judge Kiser passed in 2020, it will no doubt won't surprise you to know how heartbroken all of us who worked with him were. When Mrs. Kiser asked me to speak at his funeral, I've got to be honest, I was lost. I had no idea how to do justice to the life that he had lived. So I got to thinking, and a poem came to me. Promise you, it's not one of my own, but it's one that's always been one of my favorites, not the least because it reminded me of Judge Kiser. It goes, if you can keep your head when all about you are losing theirs and blaming it on you, if you can trust when all men doubt you, but make allowance for their doubting too, if you can wait and not be tired by waiting, or being lied about, don't deal in lies, or being hated, don't give way to hating, and yet don't look too good nor talk too wise. If you can dream and not make dreams your master, if you can think and not make thoughts your aim, if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two impostors just the same, if you can bear to hear the words you've spoken, twisted by knaves to make a trap for fools, or watch the things you gave your life to broken, and stoop and build them up with worn out tools. If you can talk with crowds and keep your virtue, or walk with kings nor lose the common touch, if neither foes nor loving friends can hurt you, if all men count with you, but none too much, if you can fill the unforgiving minute with 60 seconds worth of distance run, yours is the earth and all that's in it, and what's more, you'll be a man, my son. Rudyard Kipling wrote that, and at least in my heart, it was about the judge. I had the honor and privilege to serve as his law clerk for 10 years, and they were, without question, the most formative and rewarding of whatever career I'm going to have. Most of you here today knew Judge Kiser as a judge, a hard-nosed, plain-spoken stickler for the rules. I'm betting that half the time you weren't happy with his ruling, but I'm betting you all recognize that you were dealing with a conscientious, intelligent man whose only guiding principles were the law and justice. And I'm here to tell you that behind that door, he was all that and more. He was generous and kind, funny and warm. If we're being honest, Judge Kiser never really needed us law clerks. He knew the answers, and he didn't need us to tell him what they were. In fact, he was so knowledgeable about the law that when he was still in private practice, his colleagues called him the professor. And when he was appointed to the federal bench, his former law partner, Bob Mann, said, "We had to start buying law books after he left." A news article from 2000 said of Judge Kiser, "By all accounts, the West Virginia native who graduated third in his class is both brilliant and unflinching in his duty." But not needing us didn't mean he didn't revel in the opportunity to mold young lawyers and contribute to their careers. We all know the impact that a federal clerkship can have on a young lawyer, and Judge Kiser knew it best. He worked hard to make the experience of a year in his chambers a worthwhile one. Once a year, he would accept an invitation to sit by designation on the Court of Appeals, not because he got any great joy out of it, but because he knew his clerks would benefit from that experience. As a teacher, he was patient and kind, and hands down one of the best bosses any of his law clerks ever had. He was demanding and exacting, to be sure. Was he effusive with his praise? Not exactly. If he handed you back a draft opinion that you had worked on and he said, "Good job," that was a big deal. But all his clerks learned very quickly that nothing was going to leave his chambers until it was up to snuff, and that the highest compliment he had to give you was to sign an opinion that you helped him draft. You knew then that his high standards had been met. But as you all know, his high standards weren't reserved for his staff. Attorneys were held to the same one, and he held himself to it too. I assume that it's part of Western District lore that he once cited himself for being late to court. Story goes that when he mistakenly went to Roanoke instead of Danville one morning, he quickly got back on the road and arrived for the hearing only a few minutes late. But rules are rules, and when he took the bench, he fined himself $50, the same punishment he would have imposed on an offending attorney. Recounting the story to me, he said, "No one is above the rules of the court, not even me." It's easy to see why his clerks revered him so. And as a judge, he was unmatched. He was always, as Jim said, the most prepared person in the courtroom. And though he would never have admitted it, he was usually the smartest as well. I always loved it when he would jump into an attorney's questioning, because I knew he was going to get to the heart of the matter in one or two perfectly worded questions, either making an attorney's case or decimating it. The attorneys who practiced before him thought just as highly of him too. Among some of the quotes from attorneys that I came across after he passed, "He is intellectually top-notch. I cannot speak more highly of a judge. He is as good as it gets. He is fair, thoughtful, even-handed. He is outstanding in every way." To be honest, I think they undersold him. Except for the one attorney who said, "You had better be dead or dying if you ask for a continuance." And though he was tough, he was fair. One of my favorite things sitting in court with him was to listen to him explain a sentence, and especially why he was giving someone a life. He said frequently that he sought always to temper justice with mercy. I love that phrase, and I love that he truly believed it. But beyond his intellect and his fairness, the thing I think all of us who worked closely with him loved most was his wit. The man was wickedly funny, and if you weren't attentive, you're going to miss it. I think the memory I'll hold on to longest is the look on his face after he cracked a joke and he was waiting for you to pick up on it. Over the years, I wrote down some of my favorites, and I'll share a few with you. He once described a certain appellate court judge as having all the subtlety of a meat axe. Once in court, some attorneys wanted a continuance, and Judge Kiser sternly advised them that the trial was going to start first thing Monday morning. Heather turned around and said, "Judge, it's actually set for Tuesday." And without missing a beat, he said, "Well, I'll be here early." After a particularly misguided argument, he told an attorney, "You've aimed in the general direction of the Constitution with buckshot, haven't you?" And after a sentencing where the defendant had told him that he found religion since being arrested, Judge told me, "Scott, if I believed every defendant who said he found religion after I sent him to prison, I will have saved more souls than Billy Graham." Judge Kiser served this court for 39 years, and his service was matched only by his devotion to his family. Unlike some people of his caliber, Judge Kiser's office walls weren't adorned with accolades and awards, though I'm sure he had many. They weren't covered with pictures of him with powerful people, though he knew quite a few. No, his walls were reserved for his family. Him and Carol dancing in their living room. Another with one of his kids on his shoulders. And the grandkids. Boy, did he love when one of those emails with a picture of the grandkids came in. He loved his family fiercely, and I know that they miss him dearly. In 2014, when Matthew McConaughey won an Oscar, and for those of you with Matthew McConaughey on your bingo cards for today, you're big winners. He said he needed three things every day: something to look up to, something to look forward to, and something to chase. For me, and I'd wager for most, if not all of his former law clerks, all of those were Judge Kiser. Every day I worked for him, I admired his intellect and his dedication. Though he's been gone for 2 years, that hasn't changed. I looked forward every day that he was in the office because it gave me the opportunity to be with him, to learn from him, and to laugh with him. And God knows that he was something to chase, a hero to me and many others. I think an admirable goal for any of us is to emulate him wherever we can, to constantly strive to be better, to learn more, to do better, and to seek the promise of justice, but also to be a friend, a kind person, a humble man, and a comfort at all times to our friends and families. Judge Kiser left a legal and judicial legacy that will be unmatched in my eyes and the eyes of all who had the honor to call him colleague and friend. Thank you for listening, and thanks most of all to his family for sharing him with us for as long as you did. We're all the better for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. All right, our last speaker today is Judge Urbanski, the Chief Judge of the Western District. Judge Urbanski is a graduate of William and Mary, where he graduated with honors. He then went on to the University of Virginia School of Law. After the School of Law, he clerked for Judge Turk. He was then worked for 20 years at Woods Rogers, had an excellent reputation statewide as an exemplary trial lawyer. Following his work at Woods Rogers, in 2004, he became the magistrate judge here in the Western District. 2011, he was promoted to a judge here in the Western District and is now the Chief Judge, Judge Michael Urbanski.
Good morning. We've got a couple minutes left. No, it's afternoon, sorry. It's impossible to follow that, Scott. For those of us who are in the court family and know that Scott Jones not only is a tremendous legal talent and career law clerk, he hosts our trivia night. And we do that over Zoom. And he is funny as he can possibly be. And Scott, you did just a tremendous job. Judge Kiser would be proud of you. The first time I met Judge Kiser, I was a wide-eyed law clerk. It was in either, Jim Haskins and I disagreed about this. It was either it was the winter of 81, 82. I can't remember whether it was in December of 81 or early 82, but I was here in the courtroom when Judge Kiser was sworn in. And that was the picture, I think, the picture that's on the program that we have was when he was sworn in as district judge. And that was the first time I met him, and I was clerking for Judge Turk at the time. And I just remember being so very impressed with this really force of the law. I remember him telling me then that he intended throughout his career to write all of his opinions in longhand himself, all of them. He wasn't about to let a law clerk, like Judge Turk did. He wasn't about to let a law clerk write an opinion. He was going to do them all himself. And he had that pencil, and he had that 8x14 legal pad, and he started that way. Scott, he may not have finished that way, but I know he started that way, and that always impressed me for how seriously he took that commitment to do justice and that oath to uphold the Constitution. I came back to Roanoke after spending a couple of years away, and my second time in this courtroom was sitting right there at this little table, defense table, and being absolutely terrified, right? Because Judge Kiser was going to come on the bench. And, you know, he was, a couple of folks, Phil has alluded to it, Scott and Jim, about his focus on rule following, right? Well, I was absolutely terrified of appearing in front of Judge Kiser, because you knew he was going to challenge you. You knew whatever time you had spent, and all of us who practiced before him knew this. You knew whatever time that you had spent prepared for it, he was going to ask a question that you hadn't thought of. And you were going to be standing right here, shaking in your boots, going, oh man, how do I answer this? You know, and you knew later on, as I'm driving back to Rona, you know, that was the question. That was the important question. That was the question that was getting to the heart of the matter, the justice of the matter, the mercy of the matter. Although the work I was doing, there wasn't much mercy involved. We had some antitrust cases together, and I remember in one case in particular, Judge Kiser granted summary judgment for us, and every time after that, and then the Fourth Circuit reversed, and it came back, and every time after that, I always felt like he was looking at me a little differently, like, why couldn't you hold on to that? You know, I mean, I wrote a really good opinion. Why couldn't you do your job and hold on to it? I always felt that way. And, you know, back in the 80s and the 90s, before the Western District had local rules, and we didn't have local rules for a long time. In fact, the Administrative Office of U.S. Court made us have local rules because we didn't want to. Judge Kiser had rules, right? He was the first one with that pretrial order. It's called Judge Kiser's pretrial order. And it's when everything followed from it. And I know all of us have followed it. Norman probably did. I know I do, Elizabeth. We all follow that pretrial order. It's sort of the model. It's for when the briefs are due, when the argument must be scheduled by, and all of this. And if you didn't follow those rules, holy cow, right? I mean, you know, I know people with me, practice before me now say, oh, you know, he'll let you get by, you know, he'll let you file that brief late. It'll be okay. Well, you couldn't do that with Jack Kiser. Right? You file your brief late, he wasn't going to read it, you know, and he believed in the rule of law. Scott alluded to the time when he fined himself for being late coming to Rona. Well, Judge Kiser leaves an amazing legacy, not just in his family and his grandchildren and with the bar here. He's left his legacy with some of us who were his colleagues. When I was a magistrate judge, I'd always heard that story about Judge Kiser finding himself. Well, I was sitting on the bench one day, and I had my cell phone in my pocket, and my cell phone went off. And it was ringing, and I couldn't get under the robe to get in my pocket to turn the cell phone off, and the daggone thing just kept going and going and going. And I took a lesson out of Judge Kiser's playbook, and I fined myself $50. I held myself in contempt and fined myself $50, and the clerk didn't know what to do with it. She said, "How am I supposed to account for this money? We don't know what to do with it." But he leaves that legacy, and I can tell you, even today, because Judge Cullen and Judge Dillon and Judge Moon from time to time come down here and sit up on that bench. And you can't sit on that bench without being reminded of Jackson L. Kiser. You just can't. You sit up there and you're thinking, okay, how am I possibly going to fill these shoes? How am I possibly going to do the kind of job that he did? How am I possibly going to be as patient as he was to listen to these arguments? How am I possibly going to be as smart as he was to come up with these questions? So I think about him every time I come down here, and every time I'm sitting up there. All of us, you can't help but think about what would Jack Kiser want us to do, you know? Let me tell you another side of him that hasn't been told yet, and that is Jackson L. Kiser as a colleague. Okay, I came on in 2004, as Mark indicated, and I was magistrate judge, and I wasn't really a colleague because I was working for him, right, Judge Ballou, right. I was working for him, and he was the most patient and kind coworker you could ever imagine. I would call him up with inane, foolish questions, and he would say, "Now, Mike," and he would have me do this. When I would come down here and back in the jury room, when I would mediate some of his cases for him, no one could be more gracious and thankful when we got it done than Judge Kiser. And he was as patient a colleague and kind and thoughtful as you can possibly imagine. When I came on the district court and got to work with him as a district judge, the thing that's lost on many of us is, you know, about half of his career he was a district judge, and then he was chief judge for a while, and then he was senior judge. And of course, when he was senior judge, and for about half of the time he was on the bench, he did that. He worked for free, right? He worked for free. He worked because he loved it. He could have played golf all the time. He could have stayed at home and done the other things, but he was so focused on public service, so focused on the rule of law and the dedication, so focused on this community, so focused on the Danville, Pennsylvania area. He didn't want to leave this bench because he was worried about what was going to happen to this courthouse. He was worried about it, and with good reason. But he worked all those years, came in, worked all those years, and did it for, just like Norman's doing, he did it for free, which is just phenomenal that someone would spend all those years of dedicated public service and he could have gotten the same salary just by being at home. To me, it's just, it just shows his love for the law, his love for the people of this community, and his love for his court family, because it really was a family. I was telling Ms. Kiser this earlier. I have sometimes now, if we get some folks who are sentenced by Judge Kiser or had a case with Judge Kiser, they'll have a follow-on proceeding, whether it's a motion for compassionate release or a First Step Act case or another case. Sometimes I had one yesterday, somebody he had sentenced who had gotten out of prison and was now in trouble again. So we had to see him on supervised release. And I was, the other day, some issue came up in a case, and I had occasion to look at a transcript from a guilty plea and a sentencing that Judge Kiser did in the case some years ago. And I read his guilty plea colloquy, you know, and Rule 11 says we have to go through certain things when we're doing the guilty plea. But I read his and I thought, daggone it, that is so much better than mine. It is more thoughtful. It is more merciful. It is more compassionate. And I thought, well, I'm going to take his, and mine is now going to become what Jack Kiser did. And so that legacy lives on. That legacy of devotion, of faith to the law, faith to his family, faith to his court family, faith to this community. I can just tell you as I wrap up, all of the judges in the Western District, the U.S. Attorney and the probation, the clerk's office, we're committed to keeping the Danville division open. We're committed to this courthouse. This summer, I came, Senator Tim Kaine was kind enough to come and meet with us here and go through the courthouse and see the challenges that we're facing. We have some real challenges trying to get done what we need to get done to keep this beautiful courthouse open for the people of Southside Virginia. It is so very important to all of us, every one of us. Judge Cullen couldn't be here. Talked to him this morning. He sends his regards, and Judge Jones as well. Sorry that they couldn't be here, but each and every one of us are committed to the Danville community, are committed to Southside, and are committed to doing whatever we can to keep this courthouse for the people of this area. It's so very important. I want to, in closing, I want to thank my friend Joe Milo and his colleagues on the circuit court here, because the marshal has indicated we can't hold criminal proceedings here because of the problems with the security in this building. So in the interim, we have it, with their grace, we have a day use agreement with the Circuit Court of the city of Danville, and we're able to hold criminal hearings and cases there. So thank you, Jody, for that. While we work through the administrative process to do everything we can do. When I was talking to somebody about this courthouse, I came across a plan about like 25 years ago and approval for upgrades to this building that Judge Kiser got through, but it just never got funded. It just never got funded. Well, his legacy continues. We're continuing to still strive to work to get that done. His legacy continues in so many ways, not the least of which through us who continue his work. So thank you all for sharing him with us for free for so many years. And it was my real privilege to call him a colleague and friend. He was a great lawyer, a great judge, and a better person. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Urbanski. Well, that concludes our program. We have, I think we've said all there is to say. I appreciate the family being here. There's lunch in the back. So I guess we stand adjourned. Scott, is that it? We stand adjourned. I've always wanted to say that. Thank y'all.